2022 saw the Purdue Boilermakers take home their first Big Ten West Division Championship in the school's history, their first appearance in the Big Ten Championship game. But make no mistake about it, 2023 is a rebuilding effort with first-year head coach Ryan Walters taking over in West Lafayette. But even though they're rebuilding, can the black and gold still find themselves in a bowl game at the end of the year?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
You know, it's a little bit crazy to think that this season, 2023, is a rebuilding effort for Purdue, considering that this is a team that is coming off a Big Ten West championship. They said maybe they can build off of that momentum and maybe go to 9 wins, maybe go to 10 wins. It's not going to go that way. This is a Purdue team. This is a Purdue program that built themselves up, that rose all the way up to an 8-win level when Aidan O'Connell was in his last season, right? When they really built some of their skill positions up, right? In their last season, they got to an 8-4 level and were able to find their way in as West Division champions into the Big Ten championship game. But all that's gone, right? There's not much left of what was a Big Ten West Division championship team. If the bowl game against LSU taught us anything, is that this Purdue team in the bowl game and then now in 2023 is a whole lot different than that team that went 8-4 and won a Big Ten West championship. Make no mistake, this is a rebuilding effort for Ryan Walters in year number 1 as he takes over the head coaching position of the Purdue Boilermakers. Now, when you're talking about rebuilding, you got to talk about what came crumbling down, right? In order to rebuild, something had to come down, right? And what came down was record-setting offensive performance for the Purdue Boilermakers. Like, you look at Aidan O'Connell and what he was able to do. 6th all-time in Purdue passing yards. 5th all-time Purdue passing touchdowns as well. Charlie Jones had the most receiving yards ever in a single Purdue football season. And Jeff Brom had really big wins over the course of his Purdue career. And it all culminated in his final season in a Big Ten West Division championship. I mean, look at all of those numbers on the screen right now, from the quarterback to the tight end that's been there a few years, to the 1-year guy, right? Even Charlie Jones that was there for a year, he was able to explode and set Purdue records. And then, of course, the head coach, the identity of this Purdue football program is up and gone to his alma mater, the University of Louisville. So this is a completely different program. This is all about rebuilding the Boilermakers. Okay, you need to set, I think, level expectations if you're Ryan Walters here in year number 1. This is not a team in Purdue that's going to equal the success, right? That those numbers that you just saw, they're not going to equal that success. I don't think they're going to be as bad as I originally thought they might be in like January and February and in March. I think as more time has gone by, more optimism has been built for Purdue. Ryan Walters is doing a great job building, like in the class of 2024, for example. But this rebuild, I think, is going to take a little bit. It's going to take a little bit even this season to really get into the swing of things, because there is big time change. Normally, when Purdue has success on the football field and you reach Big Ten championship seasons, Big Ten championship games, right? You talk about Joe Tiller that won a Big Ten title back in 2000, had those success with offensive football teams. And then you look at Jeff Brom, right? These are offensive football teams, right? Generally, that's what has been successful at Purdue. You know, you are in a black and blue conference as the Big Ten you were historically, right? This is not maybe known as the most physical football program in the world, but you're bringing in a guy in Ryan Walters, and you're bringing Kevin Kane with him, who is on his defensive coaching staff at Illinois, that maybe is looking to bring some of that attitude and some of that physicality to West Lafayette. Okay, so we talked about those guys that are leaving, that are gone, that had such a big imprint on this Purdue offense, especially on the offensive side of the football. Let's start with offense. How do you replace those guys? That's the big question. When you talk about replacing that offensive production, I think you got to start at the quarterback position, and this is where Ryan Walters, I think, made his first big impact, right? He brought in Hudson Card, the transfer from Texas. He had some bright spots at times at Texas. In 2 seasons, he combined for over 1,500 yards, 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a 67% completion rate. Look, even though he had flashes of brilliance, he was never going to stick around, right? You got guys like Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning coming to Austin, Texas. Like, he was not going to be on that type of level, right? In terms of an arm talent, in terms of just being on that elite quarterback level. So Hudson Card was eventually going to find somewhere else to land. And this is a good option for Purdue. You bring in Graham Harrell as the new offensive coordinator. You're kind of sticking with a lot of air raid concepts. And a lot of the reports that have come out of West Lafayette, Indiana, have been very positive for Hudson Card. You look at former Rivals writer Mike Farrell. He named Hudson Card the top transfer quarterback in the country. So there's a lot of optimism. A lot of optimism at the quarterback position. You need to nail that going into a Big Ten season. Now, that's great, but you still like to retain at least a little bit of something from last year, and that's Devin Mockobee, right? Devin Mockobee might be one of the more underrated players in the Big Ten Conference. One of the very few mainstays that comes back from last year's Big Ten West championship team. 968 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground as a walk-on, right? The very, very first thing. Even before Ryan Walters got Hudson Card to commit to Purdue, the very first thing that he did on his very first day, he offered Devin Mockobee a scholarship. Tough runner, right? This is a tough runner. I think this is going to provide some balance, right? We talk about Hudson Card. We talk about maybe Graham Harrell wanting to stick with some of these passing air raid concepts that have worked at Purdue. I believe Devin Mockobee is going to be more involved in this offense. And I think a big reason why is they don't have a number 1 receiver on the outside, right? We're so used to at Purdue looking at Rondale Moore to David Bell, and then the one great season of Charlie Jones. There's a number 1 guy on the outside. Purdue just doesn't have that this season. Like, you look at a TJ Sheffield and a Mershawn Rice. TJ Sheffield is good as a number 2, number 3 type of option, but can he be a number 1? I just don't know. It doesn't stand out. A lot of these guys don't really stand out to me as a number 1 option. TJ Sheffield, 480 yards and 4 touchdowns receiving last season. Mershawn Rice, solid player, came up in some big spots to move the chains, but 283 yards and a score last season. I think one guy that maybe could stand out, Elijah Canyon. Injuries kept him out of last season. He was supposed to be a big boost, a transfer from Auburn, but as I said before, injuries kept him out the whole season. 6'4", 220 pounds, right? That Citrus Bowl back into the 2020 season, caught a 57-yard touchdown pass from Bo Nix. 3 catches, 80 yards against Northwestern in that game. I think maybe if anybody can kind of come out of the weeds a little bit for Purdue and really stand out above the rest, maybe it could be Elijah Canyon in this group. They had an opportunity, in my opinion, to really lock down a guy that could be a number 1 guy. Corey Gamage was a transfer coming in from Marshall. I really loved his talent, but at the last minute, he flipped his enrollment over to another Golden Black school. He flipped it over to UCF. So that was kind of a big last-minute decision that just happened, kind of late in June sometime. So it's unfortunate that happened, because I think Corey Gamage would have given a really big boost to this Purdue offense, but it wasn't meant to be. So I think they're going to rely on maybe the run game and Devin Mockobee a little bit more, because I just don't see a number 1 guy. I see a lot of 2s. I see a lot of 3s. Tyrone Tracy is in there as well. He's going to be involved in the run game and a little bit of the pass game, kind of a hybrid type of guy as well. I don't see that number 1 guy that we've seen from Purdue all this time. So how that affects what this offense does in terms of moving the chains, putting up yards, putting up points, to be determined. Like, I know we're used to at Purdue and throwing the football a lot, but I think last year this team was a little bit more balanced with the rushing attack of Devin Mockobee, and I think they should be more balanced to kind of take some of the heat off of Hudson Card as well. You bring a tight end, right? You lose Payne Durham. You bring in Garrett Miller. He missed the season due to injury as well last season. 20 catches, 174 yards. in 2021. Right now, the talent just doesn't pop for me at Purdue. I like Hudson Card. I really like Hudson Card. I like Devin Mockobee. It's just who's going to make the plays on the perimeter, I think, is a big question right now for Purdue. Spencer Holstage was a big loss on this Boilermaker offensive line. Started a lot of games over the last 2 years. That's a big pickup for the UCLA Bruins right there. So you look at Jalen Grant, a Bowling Green lineman, started for the Falcons in 21 and 22, looking to replace Holstage over there. Gus Hartwig, a leader on the offensive line, as well at center. This is an offensive line that needs to stay healthy. A lot of rotation. Guys got banged up last year. Right, if you get another offensive line at Purdue that's banged up, that's going to cause some more problems, especially if it takes a little bit for some of these receivers' routes to develop and separate from their defensive backs. But you knew you were going to take a dip. When you lose the guys that you do on offense, you knew that was going to happen. I still think Purdue can be fairly successful on the offensive side of the ball, but it's going to be up to this offensive line creating scenes for Devin Mockobee. And then maybe that opens up the pass game, and someone's got to step up. Who's going to step up on the perimeter to be that playmaker for the Purdue offense? That's a big question, a big-time question for me in West Lafayette, Indiana. Okay, let's move over to the defensive side of the football, right? That's the specialty of this incoming coaching staff. Ryan Walters, the new head coach, took an Illinois defense from not very good at all to one of the top defenses in the country, brought Kevin Kane, one of his position coaches as well, with him to be the defensive coordinator. So when I look at this defense for Purdue, I think the biggest area of concern is the defensive line. Before I jump into that, this was a Purdue defense that was 9th to 11th in the Big Ten in most statistical categories. And if you brought back maybe everybody from last year, this would still, I think, be a challenge for Ryan Walters to get this Purdue defense where he wants it to be. But you lose a good amount of guys on defense to the portal, graduation, NFL, that kind of thing. And this makes it an even bigger challenge for Ryan Walters and company here in year number one. You lose a guy like Jalen Graham. You lose Corey Trice in the secondary. How about Kieran Douglas at a linebacker spot? But I think the biggest place where you lose some impact players on the defensive line, Lawrence Johnson, Branson Dean, and Jack Sullivan. Let's go over those guys. Lawrence Johnson transferred to Auburn, 6'3", 300, a guy that could clog up the middle. That's very important. It's very underrated in today's day and age of college football, having that big guy up front that can really clog things up in the running game that goes right up the middle between the center and guards over there. Branson Dean transferred to Miami. He had 4 tackles for loss and 2.5 sacks. But the biggest one, I think, that they lost was Jack Sullivan transferring out to the sunny beaches of Southern California. Second on the team in tackles for loss. He recorded 7 last season, led the team in sacks with 5.5. So they're going to lose some pressure. I think that's what the point I want to make. They're going to lose some pressure up front on the defensive line. Are they going to be able to maintain some physicality on that defensive line? So you lose some guys on the line. The guys they brought in via the transfer portal to replace them, look, it's putting a Band-Aid on a situation. This is something that Ryan Walters and this defensive coaching staff have to address in the years to come, but here's who they got to try to replace some of those guys that they lost on the defensive line. How about Jeffrey Mba, transferred from Auburn, 6'6", 300. This is a very interesting story from this kid. Was once the top junior college player in the country. He's originally from across the pond in France, played in 9 games for Auburn last season. His standout game against Mississippi State where he had a sack and a forced fumble. Man, this kid is agile. For being 6'6" and 300 pounds, this guy's got some moves. He can make some moves, can beat O-linemen via agility or via power. I'm very intrigued. I'm very thrilled for Purdue that they were able to get a guy like this into the Big Ten at Purdue. Okay, I think he's going to be able to come in and make an immediate impact, but with these transfers, it's so kind of hard to tell, especially maybe when they haven't been the best statistically, haven't really stood out. Does a new change of scenery and maybe a new scheme help things out on the defensive line? They bring in Malik Langham as well from Vanderbilt, played in 33 games, started 11. He had 33 total tackles, 2.5 TFLs, and 1 sack during those 33 games. So you look at Jeffrey Mba and you look at Malik Langham, they didn't really put up a ton of great stats on the defensive line, but you're not looking for a lot of stat sheet stuffers on the defensive line. Maybe you're looking for run stuffers over stat sheet stuffers, so to speak, on that defensive line. So hopefully those guys can hold their own up front, because those are some big time losses on a defensive line for Purdue. You got to think they're going to take a step back up front at the line of scrimmage on the defensive side, right? You go to your linebacking group, and I think you got maybe the best player on your defense in this group, outside linebacker Kydron Jenkins. 8 tackles for loss the last 2 seasons. He led the team in TFLs last season with those 8. 4 sacks last season. He had 5 sacks in 2021. He was right there with George Karlaftis a couple of years back in terms of getting pressure on the passer, and maybe he helped alleviate some of the pressure and some of the attention that was being put on George Karlaftis over there on that side. Very interested to see how they use Kydron Jenkins. Reports from players, interviews from players are saying there's a lot of confidence, there's a lot of trust, especially in some of these pass rushers in terms of pass rush situations when they can really pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. Very excited to see how Kydron Jenkins really blends into this scheme that Ryan Walters and Kevin Kane are really putting forth. This is a guy that Purdue is really going to depend on to follow up and probably put up a lot bigger numbers. I'm curious to see if he can really explode, maybe be one of the Big Ten's best pass rushers, or maybe things go the other way, or maybe he's kind of still at that status quo that he's been with the 8 TFLs and the 4 or 5 sacks. So Kydron Jenkins is going to be leaned upon in that linebacking core. O.C. Brothers as well returns at linebacker, 42 tackles and 3 passes defended last season. Now, when you go back to the secondary, I think they're strong at safety, but they need to replace some guys at corner, right? You start with safety. Cam Allen and Sanusi Kane come back, senior safeties. They can be a solid tandem back there. Kane led Purdue in tackles last season with 72. Cam Allen, 3rd on the team in tackles with 49, 3 interceptions, and 6 passes defended for Cam Allen. Talent-wise, are these the guys the best safeties in the Big Ten? Probably not, but you put them together as a tandem with a lot of experience, I think that's going to pay dividends, especially with maybe some of the younger guys in this defensive secondary as well. So they went to the portal at corner to try to help, of course, losing Corey Trice back there in that secondary. You look at guys that have played Power 5 football that were highly recruited but haven't received a ton of looks and a ton of action so far. Marquise Wilson transfers over from Penn State. Salim Turner Muhammad transfers over from Stanford. He was a 4-star, top 200 guy kind of coming out of high school. How about Braxton Myers from Ole Miss? Short stint, young kid coming out of Oxford. Once again, a 4-star, one of the top corners of his class. So these were guys that these schools, these Power 5 schools, identified that there is talent within these kids. Now, what can this coaching staff at Purdue make these kids into? I think that's the big question that I have for the Boilermakers at the cornerback position, right? You're coming off a season, Kevin Kane, Ryan Walters, where you had Devin Witherspoon and Sidney Brown. And now you don't have that, right? I think when you look at this defense as a whole, right, you look at those guys that were able to transform that Illinois defense. This is a challenge for them. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Purdue, over the course of time, hasn't exactly been known as a defensive juggernaut. Have they produced defensive players? Yes. That have moved on to the NFL and that have played at that level? Of course. But this is a team that generally produces more offensive talent than they do on the defensive side of the football. The defensive culture has to be ingrained by Ryan Walters and the staff. I think this defense is going to improve as the year goes on, but I think it's all about the rebuild for Purdue and especially this defense, right? I think Ryan Walters is doing some good things in recruiting for 2024, but this season, I think there's just a lot to replace on this defense from a defense that was kind of in the bottom third of the Big Ten to begin with. So we know what's going to happen on offense. Solid unit, got some players coming back, some uncertainty. Kind of the same thing on defense as well. Now let's see how it all translates by taking a look at the Purdue schedule for 2023. I said it in my Rutgers preview. Those non-conference games, if you want to get to bowl eligibility, those non-conference games are huge. Fresno State, a good Mountain West team. Jeff Tedford Wright is coaching things with the Fresno State Bulldogs. That's a good Mountain West team. They go to a 3-win Virginia Tech team. Syracuse, remember that crazy game last year at the Carrier Dome? Syracuse loses some pieces as well. So you got to try to win all 3 of those games. I think Fresno State is going to be a little bit tougher than some people think. I think Virginia Tech and Syracuse could be winnable games as well. You look at the end of the schedule. Northwestern and Indiana, winnable games. So if they sweep their non-conference, they beat the Wildcats, they win the Old Oaken Bucket, that's 5 wins. And now you got to try to find somewhere in there to pull an upset. Now you look at starting in September 22nd, you go down to November 11th. I don't see a team on there that Purdue really has more talent than across the board. I think it's tough to find a game where you can say if both teams play a solid game, if both teams play a good game, then Purdue is going to come out on top. I said it at the beginning, I've said it multiple times on this video. This is a rebuilding effort. You want to see parts of this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You want to see Purdue progress as the season goes along. When I look at the schedule, I see something like a 4-8. I see something like a 5-7. I think it's going to be tough to get to 6 wins. I'll feel better about getting to a bowl game, about getting to bowl eligibility if they can sweep through the non-conference. Even if they lose one of those games, you go 2-1, you got to find a way to win 4 of those games. I don't think Indiana is a guaranteed win at this point in time, okay? I look up and down that schedule, and it's hard for me to find 6 victories right now. I think for that to happen, Hudson Card has got to sling it. Somebody's really got to step up at the wide receiver position, and you got to see some progression on the defensive side of the ball from this defensive coaching staff doing some really good things in year number 1 in West Lafayette. Look, it's a rebuilding year. I really like the groundwork that Ryan Walters is laying. I think this is going to be a better Purdue team than I originally thought. I think coming off when he was first hired and all the losses that were happening, I thought maybe this could be a 3-win team, something like that. But right now I see Purdue kind of floating maybe 4 or 5 wins this season. You're going to take a dip in year number 1. You got to get worse before you got to get better, kind of a thing. This is a Purdue program that is being rebuilt in a new image and a new mindset under Ryan Walters. And I can't wait to see how this program develops over time. But as we're talking about 2023, I think it's a challenge for the Purdue Boilermakers.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.